Hey guys, it's me, Wolf, back with, what else could it be, another Stronghold Crusader build. In the last episode we finished the marketplace with all these tiny details and now we can start to sell our excess bread and get that shmoney. But there is one problem that comes with having money. If we have it, it can also be taken away from us by other rulers, bandits or even worse, the IRS. To keep these fiends out of our treasury, we could train some soldiers, but we don't have any barracks or an armory or any weapons to fill the armory to begin with, so that's not gonna work. Maybe we could hire some mercenaries, but at the moment they are way out of our price range. I mean, after paying them, there would be no money left to protect, so that's also not very smart. I was thinking that the next logical step is to build the quarry that produces some stone for us, and if we stock up enough it can either be sold for even more money or we can use it to build the barracks or some castle walls for protection. Let's look at the quarry in game and see what it looks like and how it works. Unlike the bakery and the marketplace, the quarry is not very rich in details. And before we really begin, I think it's just fair to give you a little disclaimer up front. I tried to use this opportunity of, as I said, the building not having that many special features to address some other problems I encountered during the making, some problems that I thought are kinda interesting. So if you're not interested in some aspects, feel free to skip to whatever timestamp you do find interesting. Okay, let's go to the source. The quarry is mostly made out of wood, and the only visible details are the pulley with the claw, this chair and the little storage space on the side here. Function wise it's also pretty simple. It needs 3 workers to operate everything. One is prying out stones at the bottom and lifting them into the claw, that is then pulled up by the second worker. Then it slides down this slide where the mason releases the claw and turns the stone nice and square. This mason is apparently also a hobby wizard, because he's able to teleport the stones over to this little storage space. I don't know why he's that lazy. It would be way more convenient for us if we could just teleport them over to the main storage, but hey, for that job we can build an ox tether. And because the quarry wouldn't be functional without one, I obviously wanted to build it as well. But let's begin with the basic building first. Like in every other Stronghold Crusader build, I started with cutting some wood. Normally I'm using these flat boards and an aluminum pipe as a fence. Like this I can lightly press the wood against the fence and slowly slide it through to cut the boards to the size I need. But recently a relative renovated parts of their roof and was left with many tiny pieces of wood, and because I can use pretty much any type of wood for these miniature builds, I was happy to take some. The only problem with these pieces though is that my relative split them with an axe and thought I wanted to use them as firewood, so they are not really flat. I could just cut them once to create a straight surface, but I went with the old school method of using a hand plane. Now this side is nice and flat and the board is ready to be cut. For the thinner slices I used my bandsaw. Also, I didn't record it this time, but my bandsaw blade broke once again. I don't know what I'm doing wrong, that on every project the blade breaks at least once. 1 blade per building, that's a really bad ratio. What I gotta say though is that it did break at the seam again where it was welded together. And looking at another new blade, you can see that the bead where it was welded together is visible and does not connect the 2 pieces properly. To be fair, I don't know anything about welding, and maybe I'm understanding this wrong, but isn't this something that shouldn't happen? Having said that I don't know anything about welding, I obviously wanted to see if I can weld the saw blade back together. I only own this electrode welder and I've used it like 3 or 4 times, and after that I thought, damn, I'm just really shit at welding. I mean, everybody understands that with that amount of practice nobody could weld, but anyways. First my current output was too high and I just melted the hole in the blade. Then I turned the current to the lowest setting possible and laid the ends on top of each other just to see if I can weld it like that. and it kind of worked, but I'm not that wary of life to attempt and use this in my bandsaw. I'll just snap it to be sure not to use it by accident, and wait, it didn't even break where I welded it together. Let's just go back to the building. I wanted to begin with cutting these 10x10mm sticks to size, and what I normally did is to use my little 90-degree angle and my tiny saw to cut it like this. Obviously with the teeth down, but you get the point. This would have worked, but I knew that I have to make quite a few cuts, so I wanted to use this smaller Japanese saw. But this saw has cross-cut teeth and I can't really start the cut on the angle without damaging them. So I tried to make a little device that helps me keep my saw straight while cutting. A device that everybody and their grandma have already made, but I still wanted to show you how I made this magnetic saw guide. I bought these magnets and to be honest, I didn't look at the dimensions when I was ordering them. I thought they are bigger, but they still work and they are really fun to play around with. I simply used a flat piece of wood and drilled 5 blind holes in there, then glued the magnets inside, and later I also glued a thin sheet of wood over them. There are 3 reasons why I did that. First, I thought that the constant rubbing of the saw against the magnets might damage the saw, and the super glue might not bond well with the magnets, causing them to fall out sooner or later. And for the 3rd reason, we have to go fast forward, where I already finished the guide, and now I can wrap a piece of sandpaper around my angle and slowly sand the thin wooden slice down so that it is perpendicular to the bottom board. This opening here is to slide the workpiece through here, and I also made a 90-degree fence at the bottom to align the workpiece on. I feel like this the magnets have the right amount of force to attract the blade, but not hold it back while sawing. And that means nothing is holding us back from cutting all the pieces to the correct size. Except there's one step left. I have to make the wood look old again. I used this method of burning the wood with a blowtorch and then scrubbing it with a wire brush in every video already, and it's pretty self-explanatory, but I wanted to add one more thing why I like this method. The fire is burning the edges more than the flat sides, and it is burning everything irregularly. That makes it look more realistic, because when a wooden beam, for example, is aging naturally, it also doesn't keep its perfectly square shape and is just darker. It can warp and twist, have rounded edges, maybe some holes, and some parts are more worn down than others. I burned these 3 pieces inside my workshop just to show you how I'm doing it, but that's not very smart. I don't really want to end up with a carbon monoxide poisoning, so I'm going outside now to commit some arson. Huh, that was pretty fun. I gotta do this more often. Now we have all the parts to begin with the base platform. My way of doing this was not the best, and I could have used some wooden joints I used in previous episodes. I also took some artistic freedom. That's a euphemism for I messed up. But anyways, I clamped 5 equally spaced feet onto a straight piece of wood and glued one 5x5mm strip across them as a connection point. Then I used 2 wooden pieces as a spacer to glue 3 10x5mm strips in a 90-degree angle on here, and add the legs on the other side as well. Double it and don't give it to the next person, I still need those. And now we have these 2 platforms. I also added these sticks that are obviously very fragile, and there are no feet on these 4 corners, and here's my reason behind it. If we are looking at the in-game building again, we can see that the 4 big poles, or could we call this a column? I don't know. The poles are very close to these 4 corner feet. And I looked at it incorrectly. On this side here I thought, oh, the big pole is here instead of the foot. And that made sense to me. But on this side you can clearly see that there is the pole and the foot. And back on the first side you can tell by this corner not lining up with the big pole. So yeah, I had this idea in my head and didn't notice it until the whole building was done. I gotta defend myself a little bit though by saying that my approach is not extremely unreasonable. I mean, why would you use a thin foot when you could connect this platform to the thick pole? But long story short, this is... I took some artistic freedom.
You fucked up.
Back to the building. We can see here that the big horizontal crossbeam is held in place by these 4 sticks. Now, I know I'm a bit annoying with my thoughts in this video, I know, but structure-wise this doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, because first of all the whole weight of this beam and later also the stone is only lying on these thin sticks. And maybe I just don't get it, but the sticks on the top don't need to be there, because the weight of the stones is always pulling down and this beam is probably very heavy on its own. One reason I could think of is that the big pole has a groove here on the top and this sticks goes inside it to prevent it from moving left to right. And a less logical reason would be if the stone is very heavy, this beam is bending a little, so once the stone is released over here, the beam wants to rapidly snap back to its original form, making it jump a little. But I think that I'm thinking a bit too much again. I cut these 4 15x15mm poles to size and I just wanted to say, look at how good this tiny saw is cutting. Oh, 5 strokes and I'm done, just like yesterday with your mum. I picked that one up from the dollar store yesterday. I drew the angle of the poles onto a sheet of paper and I wanted to make holes in the poles to shove this stick through here. But because the poles themselves are at an angle and the sticks should be parallel to the ground, these holes gotta be at an angle too. So I cut this piece of scrap wood to the same angle as the poles are, and if you're holding the poles upside down on this piece, it will cancel out the angle. Does that make sense? I think this is harder to explain than it actually is, but I drilled it like that and I just left the drill in there for demonstration. Now comes the next funny part. You can tell that this simple building has its special set of challenges. Most of them I brought upon myself, but these sticks are square. That means the holes have to be square. I could have simply used a file to remove the excess material, but why not go the unnecessary long route? My newly sharpened chisels were too big for this, so I wanted to use this tiny corner cutting tool, but it's blunt and needs sharpening. I'm not doing this by hand again, cause last time with the chisels it took so long, so I whipped out the electric water stone and got from one problem to the next. The whetstone is very wobbly. So I started to take it apart to see if something can be done to make this water stone run a little smoother. Inside here the motor is connected to this belt. This belt is transferring the movement to this gear transmission that converts the high speed and low torque of the motor to low speed and more torque of the grinding wheel. I disassembled every piece, cleaned it and greased it, then put it back together. And did the wobbliness improve? So now it's time to make the chisel the sharpest tool on earth, and once I was done, the metal part can be put back into the handle. Don't worry, I didn't actually do that, but I made one hole with this chisel and then the edge kinda broke and got dull again, so I still had to use a file. Now we can shove the 2 sticks inside here, and the detail I'm about to make is not there on the in-game building, or at least I can't see it. I wanted to prevent these sticks from falling out, as well as the big poles from falling apart without just gluing everything together. So I made these little wooden pegs, drilled some holes, glued them inside, and now it's holding together. I then cut a slot for this free floating stick and connected everything, and now we can tell what the building is supposed to look like. I also made a hole in each pole, oh my god, to insert these sticks right here, and at that moment the building was still very flimsy, but adding the wooden boards to the platform is going to make it more stable. Now this is looking better, and the planks do make this building a little more robust, but there are still a few things that can make it even sturdier. The most obvious parts are the diagonal braces below the platform. The less obvious part is the little footbridge behind the slide here. In reality this wouldn't add to the stability of the building, but in my miniature case it really helps with holding the 2 sides together. Then the not at all obvious part, because it isn't there on the in-game building, are the wooden pegs that I glued into the upper stick and the big crossbeam to hold everything in place. And last but not least, the can't see the woods for the trees part, the slide that is also holding the 2 platforms together. I thought that making this slide should be the easiest thing ever, but I still had to think quite a bit about how I'm going to make it. It seems to be made out of several wooden planks aligned in an half oval shape. That part is obvious. It's not perfectly oval though, it's made out of straight boards at different angles. Now, the sides of the boards could be cut at these angles to connect them, but that wouldn't be strong enough to support the weight of a stone, so there has to be some kind of structure beneath them. I'm thinking that it could be more wooden planks to patch up the seams in combination with 2 separate borders that go around the ends. Well, thinking about it, the seams could also be held together by 3 more borders. Okay, that makes sense so far. But the border in an oval shape is kinda annoying to make. A square or rectangle slide would be really easy, 3 wooden sticks per border, done. Then I thought I could cut this oval shape out of a bigger piece of wood and then just lay the wooden planks inside here, but then only the edges of the boards would be in contact with the border. So my solution was to make a border out of singular wooden pieces. Is this more realistic? No. But I'm going to make it like that anyways. The first step was to draw half of the cross section onto a piece of paper as a template to cut all the wooden pieces. Then I glued all of them together, and to have an easier time spacing them out to connect them, I used this scrap piece of wood. This kinda reminded me of a ship, so... You can see that I left the space here open because it is like this in the game, and if we're taking a closer look at the in-game building, we can see that the slide is just a short intermission. What I'm about to build is wrong, and I, for the love of God, can't tell you how I've made this mistake, but I just didn't see this crossbeam here. I know, it's hard to believe. I wish this would just be staged like, oh no, I've made a mistake, oh how bad, but no, sadly it isn't. My thought was that the slide is held up by something behind here that we can't see, even though this beam makes way more sense. I don't know, was I drunk or something? But no, that can't be, I hardly ever drink alcohol. Then... you know what, maybe I didn't drink enough, but in any case I built my own structure that's holding up this slide. I obviously didn't want to leave it like that till the end, but for the next couple of steps it's still going to look like this. Next up is the part that makes the quarry functional, otherwise it would just be a bunch of wood slapped together, the claw and the pulley. For the claw I simply made a template out of a piece of cardboard, then traced it onto this thin sheet metal I'm always using, and after cutting it out and filing it round I had these claw parts. I also wanted to talk about this claw design real quick, because I think it's very simple yet effective. If the claw is put around a stone and the workers are trying to lift it up with a rope connected like this, the tension of this point here forces the two sides together. That means that the claw is grabbing the stone without any other mechanism, and that also means the heavier the stone, the harder it is being grabbed. And while we're at it, I'll also throw in another interesting fact. I saw in a video once that the Romans actually used this type of claw grabbing mechanism, and also another one that I thought was just genius. They chiseled out a hole like this in the top of the stone, then put 2 pins in there with this shape and a third one that's straight. Now a locking pin can be put through here, and that makes the single pins act like one solid piece. The only downside of this method is that the whole stone is being held by this small amount of material here that might break off, but I still find this very fascinating. I went back to my claw and was thinking about whether or not I should change the claw design, because I'm obviously way smarter than the Romans. No, my concern was that if the stone would be grabbed like this, then it's just going to twist and fall out. This pivoting point here was actually utilized, again by the Romans. They calculated the center of gravity for the stone blocks, then made holes where the claw can grab the stone, and like that they were able to rotate and place the block at whatever angle it needed to be placed. But enough of the Romans, our workers are stupid medieval peasants and they can't even read numbers. They are here to handle simple stones, and if the claw grabs the stone this way, the upper part prevents it from rotating, so problem solved. Right now the claw is still shiny on one side, so I spray painted it black, and after letting it dry I used an abrasive handbed to make it matte. Alright, that's it for the claw, and now we can move on to the pulley. I wanted to make a functional version of the pulley that makes it possible to lift the heavy stones up with only one human. And for that we have to take a look at the physics of a pulley. Here in game I'm only seeing one fixed roll up here, and that would mean that the force stays the same. Now, even though we need the same amount of force, it's still easier for a human to pull a rope down rather than to lift the stone up itself. It also highly depends on the quality of this roll here, and it should ideally have zero friction, but it never does. So overall we can say that this task is still pretty labor intensive. If I'm comparing this roll in-game to things I know, it reminds me most of these chain pulleys. They're working with a gear transmission and let you pull on a chain with minimal force but for a very long distance, while lifting up the heavy load for a short distance. I don't know what type of pulley systems they had in medieval times, but this seems a little too modern for me, so I decided to add a second non-static diversion roll. If we're connecting the rope like this, it would have the force that is needed to pull the stone up, but also double the pulling distance. We can make it even easier by adding 2 more loose rolls and connecting the rope like this. Now we only need 1/4 of the force, but also gotta pull the rope 4 times as long. Okay? Deal, let's make this. This was my first attempt, and these are the parts I used. I cut 8 of these egg-shaped pieces out of a thin slab of wood and taped 4 of them on top of each other to drill 2 holes. Then I cut 4 tiny rings out of this metal tube and 4 more pieces of this metric 4 threaded rod. Now I glued the eggs with holes onto the ones without any holes, and then glued the threaded rod inside to later put the metal tube over there and close everything up. Okay, first prototype is done. The metal rings are a little too short, but that shouldn't be a problem. Now I just have to tie this to the horizontal beam. Wait, how do I connect the ropes to here and here? This was just a minor setback. I patched it back up and connected the ropes correctly, so now it's time to tie it to the big wooden crossbeam and test it. there was too much friction and the rope got stuck on the side of these metal tubes. The metal rings are a little too short, but that shouldn't be a problem. I cut them off, hoping the rope would be able to slide over the bare threaded rod, and there was too much friction again. So I cut the egg rolls apart and used only the metal tube instead of the threaded rod, and with a little drop of the juice of gods, it is almost working. I still have to pull the lower roll down, otherwise the rope just takes everything with it, but that's good enough for me. I tied the rope to the back leg of the platform, and like this we can even put a little stone into the claw. Wait a second, where did this stone come from? The claw is grabbing stone from down here, and in Stronghold Crusader down here is stone, because you can only place the quarry on stone, and I don't know how to continue this segue. I wanted to place my building on some stones. For that I glued the shittiest wooden box together, for which I used scrap plywood and these tiny pieces. This doesn't look too good, but with the burning method it's looking okay. If it wasn't for the sides, you almost couldn't tell it apart from the regular burnt wood, and here the scratches of the wire brush really help by imitating the wood grain. For the stones I didn't want to go to a riverbed and collect lots of stones. It's also technically illegal, but who cares if I'm just collecting some stones? But what if everybody would do that? I never bought rocks before, but I went to the gardening center and guess how much these cost me? 4 euros, that's nothing. It would never be worth it to search, collect and carry home this many stones just to save 4 euros. Remember the part where I messed up the beam that's holding the slide part? Let's just fix that and get it over with. I've decided to keep the legs even though they aren't there on the in-game building. One of the borders was at an unfortunate height, so I cut out the beam a little over here, and I wanted to align the flat part of the slide with the flat side of the beam. That means that I had to cut out these triangular shapes from these poles. For that I simply transferred the angle of the beam on there, then I moved the line in parallel to get the part I need to cut out. And now this should fit. After a little patching up and cutting again, I glued the beam on there, then drilled the hole and glued the wooden peg inside. Now that I've atoned for my sins and the main building is done, I can start to make the tiny details of the building. Over here is a bench or a stool for the mason to sit on. I cut some sticks to size, made a simple frame with half-lap joints and glued the 4 feet on it. On the in-game building I think I can see that the sitting surface is made out of single wooden strips, so I glued them on there one by one, and I left a little extra on the edges to have this satisfying moment. The mason might be a hobby wizard, but he still needs some tools to cut the stones, and for that I wanted to make a tiny chisel and hammer. I know how a masonry chisel is supposed to look, but I don't own one. I only have one of these, and I don't know exactly what the English name for this is, but we just call it a pointed iron. This flat chisel is pretty similar to the one we need, but this one is for cutting metal, and what we need to cut the edges of stone is a mason's chipper. I always wanted to forge something, but I'm simply lacking the open space to make a coal fire. I mean, my basement workshop really isn't a suitable place for that either, but we only have to make a miniature chisel, so I guess I'm good with just holding a rusty nail into a blowtorch. and with that I was actually able to hammer it flat. Then I just filed it to a somewhat similar shape, and all the masonry chippers I've seen didn't have a handle, but I filed this part a bit too much and now it's really thin, and I thought that the handle would look better here. So I cut it off and drilled a little hole into a stick, and this time I'm using a wooden skewer instead of making a round stick myself. Then I glued the metal part inside the handle, and now I only have to shape the handle a little, and here we have a tiny chisel. Or not a chisel, a mason's chipper. As you can see, I also added a tiny steel hoop at the end so that the mason can hit it with all his might, but right now he doesn't even have anything to hit it with. For the hammer I used a metal rod and filed it down to make it square. Then I drilled a hole in the center and cut the piece off and filed it into the right shape. For the handle I used a wooden skewer again and glued the head on there with some super glue. The hammer is almost done like that, but there is one tiny detail I still wanted to add. And for that I made a cut in the top of the handle to add the tiniest metal wedge. Now the mason can go to work, but there's still one more tool we need. If you're looking at this worker here in the stone pit, we can see him prying out the stones with a pry bar. The process of making this is pretty much the same as for the chisel. I used a rusty nail, held it into the blowtorch and hammered it flat, and then made a bend to give it this typical pry bar shape. I filed one side pointy, and on the flat side I made a cut through the middle and bent the two sides apart a little bit, and with this shape it makes sense that I've heard people around where I live call this a goat's foot bar. The last detail that I almost forgot to make is the small storage room that comes with every quarry. I made it the same way I've made the bakery floor. That means making a mold out of smooth scrap pieces of wood and a hot glue gun. I mixed together some gypsum, poured it in there and let it dry overnight, and I never really know how much to make, so it turned out too thick. But no problem, while the gypsum is still a little wet, it is easy to cut it in half with a saw. After some rubbing with the rasp and some scrubbing with the spatula, we have a nice and smooth surface to draw some random stone shapes on there. Now we need some color, and I'm using the magic chisel sharpening powder again, and because the gypsum is still a little wet, I was able to get this really nice rundown stone look again. And that was it for the quarry itself, but the stones still need to be transported over to our main storage, and for that we need an ox tether. Building this one was a no-brainer. I started with cutting some sticks to size, then I made a simple frame with half-lap joints on the corners. I've already made this hole and this cut in the two thicker poles to first glue the pole to the middle of the frame and then shove a stick inside here that is secured with a wooden peg. Second pole, second peg, and now it's ready to be covered with wooden planks. I left the middle one open on purpose because I don't know. Then I tied together a nice hay bundle and glued it on one of the sides. Another tiny detail that cannot be forgotten is the string that is wrapped around this middle pole, and I'm guessing this is just a leash for the ox. Speaking of the ox, we still need the ox stone carrying thing, and I'm not an expert. Period. No, I'm not an expert at medieval carrying devices, and I did a little research that makes me believe that this carrying thing is only somewhat realistic. Let me explain why. Like this, the heavy load is lying 100% on the ox's back, and I bet when one of these chonkers is stumbling along its way to the castle, half of the stones would just fall off. The more likely and effective carrying option would be an ox cart with 2 or 4 wheels. With this cart the ox only has to pull the weight of the cart plus the stones and not carry the whole load. The downside of the cart on the other hand is that it doesn't fit everywhere, on a narrow mountain pass for example. And the wheels can also get stuck in swampy regions or generally when it rains a lot. In these circumstances this carrying method would be better again. Some examples for this would be donkeys and mules in Peru or the yaks in Nepal. But we have an ox, and most of the carts I've seen online were always pulled by 2 oxen tied up to a single yoke. That's the wooden beam that goes across their back. And I've seen many different variations of yokes from different cultures, but couldn't find something similar to the in-game thing. What's special here is that there are 2 yokes on 1 ox instead of 1 yoke on 2 oxen. Wait, sorry, I got a little carried away there. Why am I even thinking so much about this when my goal is to recreate the ox tether from Stronghold Crusader? To make the yoke I started with, who would have guessed it, cutting some sticks to size. I measured out the middle of these wider boards and just freehand drew the yoke on there. So much to recreate the ox tether from Stronghold. In the game it is just a stick, and I made these round parts at the end for whatever reason, but I kinda like how this looks. For the carrying platform I just glued these square sticks onto some wooden planks, and I thought about burning this end to make it look old, but then I checked out the in-game building again and saw that here only the yokes have this dark brown color. Luckily with my burning technique I can simply scrub the wood a little more and it becomes lighter again. To get the lengths of the strings right we need our ox as reference, and I wanted to buy one that was made by the company Schleich, where I also bought the cows for the dairy farm. Instead of going to their online store though, I went to a local toy store and they didn't have an ox. So the closest thing I could find was this water buffalo, and I just really like how this one looks, with these thick horns, and it looks really strong. And wait a second, you're not an ox? No, I would never do that to my own. Who's a good... Who's a good boy? You are a good boy. Oh, I'm losing my mind.
Take me to the rubber room. Take me to the psych ward.
I'm sparing you of seeing me struggle to connect all the pieces with the strings, and here is how it looked at the end. I connected the yokes to these beams by simply putting a string through both holes and making a knot on each side. The same goes for the carrying platform, where I put a string through here like this and then tied the knot with both ends up here. Now the details are almost done, but for the finishing touch I still wanted to make some square stones. I mean, that's what the Quarry is producing after all. First I attempted to just chip off some parts with this small hammer, and that worked surprisingly well, but later on I still used the angle grinder with the diamond cutting disc to make the rest of them. With the ox yoke decorated, we can put it onto the ox's back, and I thought that the weight of the stones would be enough to hold it in place, but I sadly had to super glue it to the ox's back. And you know what that was? That was the last detail! That means I can finally present to you the finished quarry, and as always, thanks for watching.